It's episode 32. We're here in room number 28, and it's the 31st film we're covering. I think I'm still Kev Moore, but after watching what's known as Ghost Identity in Mexico, The Mask of Desire in Portugal, The Stolen Girl in Romania, or Stolen Face anywhere else, how can I be sure about anything? Either way, welcome to the House of Hammer. We're still on our whistle-stop tour of England as Hammer takes some away days from Down Place that's also known as Bray. A Bray days? Stolen Face was filmed at the Riverside Studios in Hammersmith between the 22nd of October and early December 1951. This overran its intended 30th of November deadline by several days for all kinds of reasons, one of which included Elizabeth Scott refusing to go on set at a personal time of the month. After the post-production and editing process, Stolen Face premiered its London run at the Plaza from the 25th of April 1952, before going on general UK release on the 23rd of June. This is all care of Exclusive, which placed it on the most surreal double bill ever with The Fighting Seventh, which is also known as Little Bighorn. The film itself concerns Paul Henreid playing Dr. Philip Ritter. He's a top-class plastic surgeon who alters the face of Lily, a female convict, to resemble that of Alice, a concert pianist he's fallen in love with but just can't have. And it's all in the vain hope that a leopard can change its spots if you jiggle them around a bit. Of course this is never going to work because you can even give a leopard a nice hat and it'll still leave you with no face. And speaking of which, here's our good friend Ben Taylorson to talk about that very thing.
Cinema history is littered with facial trauma of varying sorts, so I thought I'd take a look at a few examples of where a character had their face altered, repaired, removed, replaced, or is notable for some other face-related peculiarity. I must warn you, listeners of a sensitive nature may find parts of this segment a little upsetting. Also, it's spoilers ahoy from this point onwards, so if you're worried about having your first viewing of an unseen face film blemished by my prattling, skip on a few minutes. And here we go. Number 1, Eyes Without a Face. This French film from 1960, titled Les Yeux Sans Visage, is a particularly grisly affair. A young woman named Christiane suffers a terrible facial disfigurement in a car accident. Her father is a surgeon, not afraid of experimental new techniques, who plots to repair Christiane's features by removing the face of another young woman and grafting it onto his daughter. In an attempt to achieve this, his faithful assistant Louise lures numerous unsuspecting young women to Dr. Genesier's House of Horrors for non-consensual facial transfers. But Christiane's body rejects every new visage that's clagged on, and the repeated attempts result in her going slowly mad. Well, as you would. Number 2, The Man Without a Face. This 1993 movie is an emotive tale about the relationship between a young boy and his mentor, a reclusive teacher with a badly damaged face and an even more badly damaged reputation. In the best tradition of cinema, the teacher and the pupil learn from each other and both grow as people by the end of the movie. My only gripe, and a gripe that I've gripped for years— do you grip a gripe? It sounds like a slogan, like push a push pop, or one sheet does plenty, wettable, ringable, strong as bull. Anyway, where was I? Ah yes, my issue, it's the misnomer. He does have a face. He does not have no face. Admittedly, it's a badly scarred face, but it's still there. Unlike the face in number 3, Dick Tracy. Not the face of Dick, you understand, but the face of the Blank, aka Breathless Mahoney, aka Madonna. The Blank is just one of a number of facially challenged characters to appear in the movie, with Lips Manless, The Brow, Prune Face, and several others. The Blank, however, has no discernible features whatsoever. They are just that. Blank. Smooth, like having a crackless bottom for a face. I remember watching as a child wondering how that worked. How do you eat, or breathe, or yodel? But in fact, in the end, it's just Madonna wearing a mask. So instead of being a man without a face, it is in fact a woman in disguise. As an aside, research has led me to discover there is another Dick Tracy villain called No Face. He also does actually have a face, but with extremely forgettable features, so much so they cannot be remembered or described by anyone who sees them. Sounds a bit dubious to me. Speaking of which, we move on to number 4, Die Another Day. This 2002 James Bond outing features facial changes, and indeed a change of ethnicity, so remarkable it stretches the level of plausibility even within the 007 universe. In the movie, Colonel Tan Sun Moon uses gene therapy to have his appearance altered through DNA restructuring, thus transforming a character played by Korean-American actor Will Yun Lee into one played by Englishman Toby Stephens. It's enough to melt your ice palace. Sticking with Hollywood implausibility, we now go to one of the most recognised botched plastic surgery reveals in number 5, Tim Burton's Batman. During a scuffle with our flying rodent-resembling hero at the Axis chemical plant, villain Jack Napier topples off a catwalk and falls into a vat of acidic chemicals. Rather than being terminally dissolved, Napier is merely hideously disfigured and turns to a backstreet surgeon to restore his looks. Unfortunately, the surgery is far from successful, and Napier is left with a permanent rictus grin. He's also bright white with green hair, but that just tends to get glossed over. Anyway, Napier, now insane, chooses to embrace his new look and rebrands himself as the Joker. Speaking of cheeky chappies, next is number 6, The Abominable Dr. Phibes, where a famous organist is believed to have been killed in a car crash upon hearing about the death of his beloved wife Victoria during surgery. But Phibes in fact survived the crash, albeit horribly scarred and left unable to speak. He resurfaces in London some time later, using prosthetics to alter his features, making him look just like Vincent Price. He and his silent assistant Volnavia then go on a 10 Plagues of Egypt-themed killing spree, hunting down those he believes are guilty for his wife's death through medical incompetence. He takes his Vincent Price mask off towards the end of the film, so you get to see the results of the car crash, which has turned him green for some reason. Killers in masks on the big screen are rather common. I'll mention a couple of others that use actual faces as masks. Grim, I accept, but this is where we find ourselves. There's Leatherface from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, who in fact has at least 2 different masks comprised of the features of some of his victims. It's always good to have a spare. But the penultimate movie I'm mentioning is number 7, Silence of the Lambs. I've often wondered if Hannibal Lecter became a cannibal simply because it rhymed with his name. Like if he'd been called Taylor, he'd have been a blackmailer. Keith the Thief, Bert the Pervert, and so forth. But anyway, I remember watching Silence of the Lambs the very first time and wondering how on earth Dr. Lecter could possibly escape the heavily guarded Tennessee courthouse even after murdering 2 of his guards. When the reveal comes, and we realise Lecter adorned not only the uniform of one of his victims, but also severed his face and placed it atop his own, so as to be mistaken for an injured police officer, and thus rush from the scene to his escape, it's truly chilling. But finally, I have left the best until last. Number 8, 1997's Nicolas Cage action classic, Face Off. This sees John Travolta as FBI agent Sean Archer going undercover as notorious criminal Castor Troy to extract information from Troy's brother. In order to look just like Troy, who has been comatose following a shootout, they surgically remove Troy's face and replace Archer's with it. However, wouldn't you know it, the now faceless Troy wakes up from his coma and adorns Archer's face. The criminal has become the FBI agent, and vice versa, and the two face off. See, it's a double meaning, the title, but I'm sure you already knew that. It was originally written in 1990, and the script went to Michael Douglas, who, the screenwriters hoped, would star in it alongside Harrison Ford. I bet you didn't know that.
Now, it could be argued that the central concept in Stolen Face isn't totally original. The Bride of Frankenstein would probably have something to say about that. But what made this so breathtaking was the fact that the mad scientist wasn't simply creating a new life. He was retooling a pre-existing one to feed his own peccadillos. The idea of having an almost godlike control over another's appearance and how they would then live their life in Stolen Face has possibly indirectly influenced some quite notable films through the years. The most blindingly obvious would have to be Alfred Hitchcock's Vertigo, where Jimmy Stewart falls in love with somebody else's spooky wife, who falls out of a tower. Twice. I must say that here at the House of Hammer, falling out of a tower is perfectly acceptable behaviour. The film director Brian De Palma was so impressed with Vertigo, he did his own 70s version called Obsession, complete with a bit of creepiness in the incest department later on. Actually, the 70s must have been weird in America, because 1977's Scalpel lifts Stolen Face practically complete, including the piano, and still manages to throw in yet another dollop of creepy incest. What was wrong with these people? Stolen Face has resonated enough through the decades to warrant an announcement from Warner Brothers that in conjunction with Hammer, a remake was to go in front of the cameras in 1993. Thankfully it didn't, because Lord knows how weird it had got by then. The ideas from Stolen Face still bob to the surface every now and again, and one of the most recent ones I can remember involving a creepy doctor was Antonio Banderas in The Skin I Live In. And whilst we're on the subject of creepy doctors, how creepy can it get? I know the perfect man to investigate. Here's Smokey. Just Smokey. Like Plato, but less hummus.
While Stolen Face does require somewhat of a small amount of suspension of disbelief to enjoy, okay, make that a huge bucketful actually, it does raise some interesting notions. Is it ethical to surgically alter someone's face so they look like a lost love? Is it then morally wrong when you get angry that said person doesn't behave like the person they now resemble? And can you then live with the fact that you then ditch that person only to rekindle your romance with the love that you no longer have to be apart from? I think we all know the answer to those questions anyway, don't we? However, it does throw up at least one more scenario. Is it ethical to actually enter into a relationship with a patient? That's what stuck with me while watching the movie. We've all seen TV shows or films when Dr. McDreamy enters into an illicit and tawdry affair with chesty blonde patient, and also when Lieutenant Sex Machine rescues damsel in distress Miss Hotpants from a would-be assassin, and they trip and fall and end up in bed together. The offending duo are almost always found out by their superiors, and are threatened with losing their career or being sent off to do some traffic duty or whatnot. But it occurred to me, is this actually a real thing? Is it really frowned upon to break the boundaries of your professional status and enter into a relationship with said patient/victim? In short, the answer is yes. It really, really is. In Stolen Face, Dr. Philip Ritter would be subject to a hell of a lot more than the rather stern talking to his colleague gives him for marrying his ex-con patient who has acquired the face of Elizabeth Scott. Although, to be fair, I can almost forgive him on that one. Doctors, for one, are massively discouraged from any kind of fraternisation with patients, outside of the confines of a medical situation. All joking aside, it really can cost them their career, and some extremely severe punishments. Also, something that really didn't occur to me, but there's a massive psychological effect that can occur to the patient when any kind of trust issues are brought up. Think about it, this is a person you've trusted with your health, and in some respects your entire body. So anything goes wrong when you get together, that kind of thing can seriously mess with your head. Now, this is not to say that it is strictly forbidden. According to the handy guidelines that Ask Jeeves provided me, is that doctors and their patients can become entwined if a suitable amount of time has passed since their medical relationship has ended. What's a suitable amount of time, you may ask? Good, I'm glad you did ask, because so did I. And the answer is, who the hell knows? There is no set timeline to these things. Basically, what I think those medical chappies are trying to say, don't bloody do it. It just isn't worth it. So, what about our friends in blue? Now, this is where it gets a little murky, and not in a good, kinky way either. I've already done the handcuffs and truncheon joke in a previous episode, so I'm not going to go there. Where the police are concerned, dating a witness or anyone connected to an investigation is a huge no-no, and for many obvious reasons. You can hardly be impartial when it comes to a specific case if your significant other is withholding rumpy-pumpy, just so you can get them off the hook, can you? I'm not actually asking you, that was rhetorical, but we've all been there, right? There aren't any rules about entering into any kind of relationship with a colleague, as long as it's all conducted in a professional manner, it seems. That's romantic, isn't it? Are you going out with her, Officer Jenkins? Yes, sir, but please know we are acting in the strictest professional manner possible. I guess the moral of all of this is, you want to date a patient? Don't. Want to get that eyewitness under the sheets with you? Only do it at Halloween and you're pretending to be a ghost. Platonically.
After that, Smokey decided he's going to abandon his dream of being a doctor, but he'll still make house calls at reasonable rates. This place is going to look a lot more glamorous now thanks to the presence of certified Hollywood legends Paul Henreid and Elizabeth Scott. Paul Henreid is probably best known for his portrayal of the patriotic Victor Laszlo in 1942's Casablanca and lighting 2 cigarettes at once during a love scene with Bette Davis in Now Voyager from the same year. By 1952, his career was taking a bit of a dip as he started on this, his first of 2 films for Hammer. His next would be Mantrap, which we'll be covering very soon. Hammer weren't so lucky with Elizabeth Scott. This is her only film for the studio, which is a real shame because at this time Hammer were about to lean heavily into film noir territory thanks to their US deal with Lippert Pictures, and this was her corner of the playground. This was a boom time for the genre, and as an ice-cold femme fatale, Scott was there with the cream of the crop. Making 18 films in a decade, lending that sultry voice to the Lux and Screen Guild Theatre on the radio shows, and also being a model and TV regular, it's no surprise that her close friend Edith Head would be on hand to supply her with a wardrobe for this weird little studio in England for nothing. Which came as quite a relief for everyone because her outfits would have cost more than the rest of the film. Needless to say, despite being the B picture to a forgettable western, we still have a modest hit on our hands here. Variety said the pacing is laborious, though Paul Henreid and Elizabeth Scott supply some substance. Faint praise indeed, thanks. Picture Show observed that the stars make the best of their roles and the settings are good, but the film often lacks conviction. I'm not sure what they're on about. I saw at least a few convicts in it. And Today's Cinema described the film as fair popular entertainment, but added that none of it should be taken too seriously. Which is fair enough. This isn't Star Wars after all. So that's what the contemporary reviews said. Let's bring you back up to date now and see how it fares to a modern audience. If you can call us modern.
Okay, my friends, we are still in the warm embrace of 1952 with Hammer's next effort, which is Vertigo without a face. But no, I jest. No, we are on to Stolen Face. The first question I want to throw out there straight away is to both, but we'll go around the room a little bit. Being very fair and kind, I think we can agree that the last couple of efforts from Hammer have lacked somewhat in, I can't say in quality, because not every Hammer film we've watched so far has been of a high quality, but with some of their higher quality efforts, we've kind of gotten used to what they can do. But after the last couple, I as we mentioned in the last episode, or I mentioned especially, I was feeling a little bit jaded with what we had seen. I want to know if you guys agree with me that this is a step up from what we've seen over the last couple of episodes, especially. Ben, I'll throw it to you first.
One thing I will say, just this sort of segues nicely with what we were talking about, I think, in the last episode, is that we should give some sort of give it a bit of a not a buy, because I agree is what I'm saying. It's definitely a better film, but we need to give the other films a buy because this is by far the best quality print that we've seen. We've seen this in high definition, which is the first. I think this is the first time we've managed to see a Hammer film so far in HD.
We saw this on the Blu-ray copy. Yeah.
It's the earliest Hammer film that's on Blu-ray. It's actually an extra on The Mummy.
So exactly. But well said, Kev. So you've got to accept that feeds into your ability to watch it and appreciate it a bit more. But that said, yes, this is a far more ambitious story and project than we've seen for a while. It's much more original. Although when we say original, as we'll talk about elsewhere on this episode, this is a story that has been done several times over the years in many different guises, but this is perhaps one of the earliest sort of explorations of the themes therein. But yes, long way of saying I agree. It is a step up, and it is a much more satisfying watch than we've had in maybe the last few episodes.
Yeah, I completely agree. Kev?
Yeah, quality-wise, it's unbelievable. It's such a high watermark. Even from your opening shot, it's almost like a statement of intent, because you're treated to the grille of a Rolls Royce, and it's pretty much the whole stamp of the film. You know,
the aesthetic of it.
Yeah, from the get go, it's almost like you've been driving around in a Bentley, and suddenly you've actually afforded a Rolls Royce, and this is what you've got. Yeah, it's so much better. Not just in production standards, but the way it's filmed, the cast that it's got. Now, definitely a shout goes to Terence Fisher and Walter Jimmy Harvey, because they've shot a really, really impressive looking film with this one.
Yeah, it's very pretty to start off with. You can tell there's been a little bit of money spent on it as well. There are several noir qualities to this film as well, including a couple of the montages, which we'll come to a little bit later on. But that's the thing, isn't it? We should point out straight away, this film rests on Paul Henreid and Elizabeth Scott. I mean, Kev may have already given the plot before we get into the film, but the basic plot, I bloody hope so, mate. But the basic plot of a doctor trying to recapture a lost love by transforming the face of someone completely, irresponsible and not, that's a gothic love story. That's it. And these two handle it exceptionally well.
They do, but I think we were talking about this before we started recording, but it's definitely worth bringing to the pod, is that if you read the description of this film on IMDb and as you said, listen to Kev's synopsis, the main part of the film doesn't actually begin until there's 25 minutes left. The setup is almost like a separate film, and you can enjoy it as a standalone thing in its own right. You've got this romance that fizzles out, and that kind of ends the first plot of the film, and then you have this second plot, and obviously the two stories tie together. But it's quite satisfying watch, because I try to go into these films cold if I've not seen them before, and I'd read the synopsis, and to be honest, for well over the first half of the film, I'm thinking, well, this isn't the film that I've seen, trailed, or I've heard, the description of. I mean, I could deduce where it was going to go, because you see films, and you can do that. But in the same way, there was an awful lot more to this film than the basic synopsis would give you. It was a lot deeper than just, the almost horror sort of story that is projected in the one line or two line summary.
The IMDb synopsis is only skin deep. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, indeed. Oh. Yes, they didn't peel back the layers.
Oh, there you go. I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because that's another question I wanted to ask you too. Was that if you think about this film, so like the very beginning, when you meet the doctor and you see his practice and what he does, it's very charming and it's quite English and it's very laid back. Then we get into a very brief moment of not slapstick comedy, but kind of bedroom farce comedy of when he's first meeting Elizabeth Scott. And then obviously we go through a romance, so we get the romance plot as well, and then we get darker after that. And there's that, we've complained about it before about, where's the tone of this film? But this film has tones all over the place, but I think it kind of marries them well. I wondered if you guys agreed with that.
Works very well, yeah. The bedroom stuff, especially, it's like it happened one night. Hey, no, I'm keeping it clean. The bedroom stuff, like where he's got a security chair between the hotel rooms, which is obviously something that has become something for the ages.
Yes, of course, yes, because, you think that no one would do that nowadays, but apparently some people do, don't they? They barricade their door in their hotel room.
It's the only way to be safe in this dangerous world.
But the lightness of the tone, anyway, I think is perfect, because it lets you buy into the relationship that these two have and sets up for the romance that's to come. And without that, it would have seemed forced, having these two people suddenly stuck in the dog and duck for weeks on end for nothing more than a cold.
Kev, we're back in the pub, mate.
What a glorious pub as well.
Isn't it? It's a great pub. I didn't quite need the close-ups of everyone singing in the pub. That was a little bit odd, but I did enjoy the pub. It was wonderful to be back there. Hang
on a minute, this is a pub with everything, because it's got darts, a piano, and it's got a bottle of Jim Beam in every room. Fantastic.
It does. And can you imagine the prices as well? It'd be amazing.
3 and 6.
Well, there you go. Ken knows.
It is almost like sort of all of the our favourite elements of pubs thus far have been placed together to make one super pub.
Super pub.
This is the film of the super pub. I completely agree. Yeah. But I will have to say something else that surprised me was, so Alice is already kind of betrothed to David. Now,
Kinda. I like that. I'm kind of married, or I'm kind of engaged.
Well, he says that after her piano tour of the world has ended, that's when they're going to get married. So it's not quite there. Anyway, but my point is, right, is that with any other sort of standard romance thriller, which I suppose you can sort of class this as, he would be horrible. He would either be abusive or just a nasty person, but he's not. He's a genuinely nice guy who likes to help her and, realize her dreams. And when he realizes that she's not for him anymore, he graciously steps aside like a proper English gent.
It's more.
Did you get that?
Do you not think did it not remind you a little bit of To Have and To Hold, with the same relationship there, where you've got an older guy and a younger woman, and she's obviously taken to him for his character and his attributes, but she doesn't necessarily find him physically attractive. But they're not in love. They're maybe happy together, but there's no spark there. And then she meets someone with whom she does have the spark, and he is such a gentleman that he's willing to move on and accept that they have no future together, and it's a much more mature, and almost nuanced look at love. And I think that this whole film is nuanced to a certain degree, because there's, every character is flawed to a lesser or greater extent, and that's what makes it so interesting. Is that there aren't good guys and bad guys as such. I mean, there are to a certain degree, but it's not as straightforward as that. And that it comes back to the word I used, I think, right at the beginning of the podcast. It's ambition. This is a film that might not have worked, and I imagine in some people's eyes it doesn't work. But there's a lot to enjoy and there's a lot to take in. Going
back to your flawed characters, I think the most flawed has to be Lily, who is a psychopathic kleptomaniac. She's wonderful, which is quite a star turn, really, for Elizabeth Scott, because obviously we've seen her in quite a few noir, and she's always been a killer dame. But for her to do a dual role, and for her to... I don't know how she does it. There's very few scenes where you're confused as to who you're watching. Even though the different characters, you can tell just by the way she holds herself. Her body language changes. And it's almost like Jeremy Irons in Dead Ringers, where he put a pebble in one of his shoes to change his walk, which is perfect. And it just gives you that strange... There's something that gives you an instinct that you're watching Lily and you're not watching Alice. And even though they allude to her hair being different at the end of the film, I hadn't noticed. I didn't pick up on that at all. It must have been just brushed the other way or something.
We're men, we don't notice that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
I'd give a lot of credit as well to Mary McKenzie, who was the actor that played the character before her transformation.
Yeah.
So when
Lily, yeah,
when she's scarred, because she's excellent. She sums up that kind of you sort of uneasy feeling you have about the character. You've heard all these things about who she is, and she doesn't do anything wrong on screen, yet there's always that feeling underneath that she might do. And just as an aside, it's a real tragic tale of that actor. She died. She was only 44, and she died in a car accident. She's mostly known as a radio actor, but she had done some other things on stage and screen as well, including a few TV things before her death. So, but I think she's definitely worthy of a plaudit, a positive mention here, because she really brings that character to life before, as you say, it becomes Elizabeth Scott's character.
We shall raise our glasses to her now, gentlemen, because it's a wonderful performance. Absolutely,
it is, and that's why it becomes believable that she's set up this character in the first place, because even with her underworld contacts that we meet later on, it's definitely there that this is believable that she has had all this life. Because she was horribly disfigured during World War II, wasn't she, in the Blitz? And
that's right. Yeah, it was a war wound, wasn't it?
Yeah. And of course it had altered the way that she thinks as well, and that's why they were saying, well, if you can make people prettier, you've been showing that this works, and your experiments have worked perfectly. You're changing all these people for the best. Well done, Doctor.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's a ridiculous comparison, but it's sort of like, you look to not the classic, but you look to Young Frankenstein and you go for the Abby normal brain, and instead of the real one. But you put Elizabeth's face on her, that's not going to stop her mind from working the way it does, Yeah, I mean, it's trite, but beauty is only skin deep, as they say in the film as well.
Yeah.
But it's true, and I think it's valid for the rest of the film.
I think the concept, though, that the theory that's put forward, that if you have a disfigured prisoner, particularly female prisoner, and don't get me wrong, not for a second saying there's any truth in this theory. But the theory is put forward that if you can alter the physical appearance of someone, you can give them the self-esteem and the confidence with which they might seek a ordinary, in inverted commas, life rather than a life of crime. And I think that's a really extraordinary thing for a film to explore. And obviously the whole crux of this film sort of depends on whether that works or not. But I think that's again. I'm going to keep coming back to that word because I think it's apt the whole way through. It's an ambitious theory, an ambitious project to undertake as a film, and without a subtler hand, it would have seemed almost exploitative. But I don't feel that's the case in this film. I think it's done with care and compassion and consideration, and even the fact that it turns out not to be something that works isn't to the film's detriment. It still leaves you thinking, well, yes, that's a really interesting angle to explore.
If anything, I think it probably reinforces that angle as well when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, very much so. Yeah. I agree with that. Before we move on to our sort of wrap ups and ratings of this, I'd like to ask you another little question. This film, we had a cut that was 69 minutes long, if I remember correctly, which was the Blu-ray cut we had. So I mean, it's got to be pretty much the definitive edition.
That's the English one.
But as we said, it looks great. This is the best print of anything we've seen yet, which is wonderful. And if people have access to it, then I really do recommend they seek it out just to see how it can look. But let's have a little fun, because there is a lot of fun in this film. So let's go through some favourite scenes and favourite lines and favourite motifs that are thrown in here, because there is a lot to be had. So I'll go to you, Kev. Give us a favourite line or scene. Throw us something.
Cigarettes all over the place. Oh, my word. Cigarettes all over the place, right from the offing. In fact, this ties into the montage as well, because we've said about montages. But Dr. Philip Ritter, our main protagonist, Paul Heinried, he's a real sort of 90-a-day man. He's basically coming out of surgery, and the first thing he's doing as he's scrubbing down is lighting up. And when he gets to the Dog and Duck, he signs in at the registrar while he's actually holding a cigarette in his hand. He's signing the register, lights another one up as he's walking up the stairs, and then you get to his room where he's got his bottle of bottle of Jim Beam or wherever it is. Johnny Walker.
I think it's Johnny Walker. Yeah.
Johnny Walker. Yeah.
Oh, why do all whiskies begin with J? Anyway, that's for another podcast. But
there's a segment in that there, Kev.
Definitely in the offing. It's practically like a cat. It kind of drops into this really nice smoking jacket with cigarettes and a bottle of Jim Beam. No, Johnny Walker. Again. But then,
you'll get it right.
Yeah. But then later on,
Jägermeister, that doesn't count, does it?
No.
Who's
God
counting?
almighty. Nobody ever is. But later on, which Smokey pointed out and I'd completely forgotten about, was in one of the later montages, he's walking through the street and he lights up a fag and then just looks at it in kind of disgust and just goes, "What am I doing?" and throws it away. And for the rest of the film, you don't see him light up. It's just such a bizarre kind of thing to have, just as a kind of subplot.
You've seen the light.
Yeah, apparently so. But it's only when his insane new wife has threatened to kill him that's when he thought, I just don't need to smoke anymore.
Just not enjoying it like I used to.
No, she's ruined it for me. God, women. But I've got to tell you, my favourite line is that when, obviously, Dr. Ritter has been rejected by Alice and his colleague goes, do you know, there's only two things that make a man look like that or behave like that, and one is women and one is drinking. He says, and you don't look like a drinking man. And he went, he started out the film by giving a bottle of whiskey to a stranger.
He's on all the whiskies.
Next night, he had a bottle. He was sourced on champagne with said stranger. He then drinks through the entire film, even going to a party in his own house and grabbing a passing bottle of booze off a stranger as well. He is obsessed by booze.
Well, do you think it's because he's actually quit smoking and he's got to pick up another vice anyway?
It's very possible. Yeah. But I love that line. It was sort of like, you don't know your mate at all, do you? I know he might hide it well, but not that well.
Certainly not Ben and Smokey standards, is he?
No, absolutely not. No, we could go Mr. and Mrs. easily. How about you, Ben?
I enjoy the scenes early on where he's our doctor's overworked and he needs his holiday, and obviously it's his holiday that he goes on and he meets his lover. But they're driving back after a hard day at the office, and he falls asleep at the wheel and almost kills them both. Then it's kind of laughed off as, I almost fell asleep at the wheel. We almost died, didn't we?
It was like
you almost died.
Yeah. It's like driving a waltzer.
But then he's so surprised when his colleague gets out the car and says, "I'm driving now." "You're driving now?" "Well, yes, you did almost just kill us, you know." "Oh, yes, I did, didn't I?" all the lols. Yeah. But I quite like those. The fact that it does have the odd moment of levity. You know, I mean, actually, the first half of the film is quite light, to be honest. But you know, the fact that it's, as you talked about the tone earlier, it has, you know, sort of a nice rolling tone of you know, that almost echoes reality. Yeah, is the end of the film's credit. So I enjoyed that. I mean, I enjoyed the whole film. There's lots of highlights. We did say before we started recording we weren't going to spoil this one. I think we've done a good job thus far of not alluding to exactly how the film ends. As I say, if you read the IMDb description or any other description online, synopsis-wise, it's going to take you to about the 55 minute mark, but we just won't reveal what happens in the last 15 minutes, other than to say that it's quite a shocking ending.
Yeah, we must point out that, but I mean, the ending, I mean, it's a bit of a twist ending, and it is, as you say, it's a shocking, and it is a surprisingly somewhat brutal ending as well. But I really wasn't expecting it to end that way.
Really?
Me neither. No.
I was. It happened, to be honest, the ending was more or less what I expected. I'm not going to go as far as to say that I'd envisaged the scenario that occurs or exactly what happened, but I did think the film only had a few outs, and I was just wondering which one of them it was going to be, and if I was a betting man, this is the one I probably would have picked. But again, that's not to say that it's predictable, because it isn't.
No.
And it's certainly not to say that it's not an ending that's worth watching, because it really, really is.
It's deeply satisfying.
It is, yeah.
It really is, yeah. Just briefly, I remember, I only remember half of this, but I do remember someone asking us, I can't remember where, it may have been on Twitter, I can't remember where, but saying, you know, about the morality of this film. Where is the morality of this film? I personally, I'll ask your opinions in just a second. I don't know if, when a film is this, when you have to suspend so much disbelief, because I mean, come on, this guy's giving a new face to a female prisoner to replicate his lost love. Okay, you've got to suspend that much disbelief.
Oh,
anyway.
I agree. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I really don't think that the morality side really impacts it very much, because you don't, you know, he's a pining genius, you know, that's what this is, you know, and we've seen, as we'll mention, you know, through the episode, we've seen pining geniuses for 100 years now in film. So I personally don't think that the morality side of it really comes into it that much. Let me ask you, Ben, what do you think to that? Just briefly before we go on to the ratings.
I think there is a moral question, particularly looking at it now with sort of 2022 sensibilities. I think there is a moral question, because what he's doing is wrong. And I think it's very difficult to argue against that. And I mean, it's effectively, I'm going to give Kev the credit, or sorry, Smokes, if it's you, but I think it was Kev who said it's effectively My Fair Lady taken to the extreme.
Yeah.
You know, and he is doing what he does for purely selfish reasons.
Yeah, that's true.
Although, you know, within that is his desire to save, in inverted commas, this young woman. But it is a bit, it is, yeah. So you can look at it from both points of view. But I think it is a bit, yeah, I use the word sick, but that's a bit over the top. You know what I mean? I think it's a bit if you look at it from that point of view. But in the same way, again, coming back to the deftness of touch of the director and the writer, it doesn't feel like exploitative to watch this. You know, you don't feel as though he's turning this ugly young woman into this sex pot because he wants to satisfy himself. You don't get that at all. You more get that he's a broken, man who's been rejected by the one woman he's ever loved, and he's desperate to reclaim some of that feeling. And it's a much more sort of sensitive approach, I suppose. But I think there is a moral question to explore. Kev, what do you think?
Well, bizarrely, in my summing up, I was thinking about it, and I thought at first I did have problems with the whole Doctor's motivation for creating a copy of Alice. But then, if you'd had a whirlwind romance with Alice in a pub for a week or so, and she turned out to play piano and play darts, and it's Elizabeth Scott, I'd probably get a bit obsessed as well,
And drinks pints, Kev, and she's on the
she
pints.
drinks pints,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, she's the perfect woman. My God.
She's a proper woman.
I must say as well, one thing we haven't paid attention to is the lip syncing on this.
Oh, yeah.
Because Mackenzie will have had to lip sync afterwards to do the Cockney accent for Elizabeth Scott.
Yeah.
Wow. All I can say is that is amazing lip sync.
Yeah. It's immaculate, isn't it? It's immaculate ADR. Yeah, it's
fantastic. And I'm thinking, God, they will have been doing it analog. This is ridiculous. It's so nailed. It's fantastic.
You don't notice that it's another voice coming out of her.
Well, you do if you're used to seeing Elizabeth Scott.
Well, true, but if you buy into true, this is true. But if you buy into these characters, you can't see the joy.
No, I didn't notice at all.
It's fantastic.
Didn't see any joy whatsoever.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. I will agree with that. Okay, my friends. Okay, we've done that. So let's go on to some final thoughts and some ratings. Kev, I'll go to you first. Some thoughts and some. And a rating, please, for 1952 Stolen Face.
Definitely worth seeing. It's possibly one of the easiest ones we've got to be able to see. There's just so much. It says a lot about the rich and powerful as well, this film. If you've got that kind of celebrity lifestyle, because at one point we do have Lily going a little bit off the rails and getting back into underworld tones. So the fact that Dr. Ritter is actually trying to cover this up by using his position and his money, it still goes on today, and it's kind of making a statement about that as much as everything else. Also, I do love that Dr. Ritter is a proper Renaissance man. I mean, he's an artist, sculptor, and Pete Snipe smacker whenever it's needed. He's fantastic. So, yeah, for that, I'm giving him a 9 out of 10.
Nice. I like it. Oh, by the way, we must admit, there's one bit of, proper violence in this, but one punch thrown, and it's an awesome one, by the way.
Yeah, beauty.
We are witnessing some awesome punch-ups in these Hammer films. We really are. Starting with, forgive me, River Patrol, but and also leading up all the way to here, we are seeing some awesome fights. Oh, no, Dick Barton got there first. I haven't gone with him, sorry. But yeah, no, we have. I'll go next. I can't really follow anything up there. This was a lovely surprise. I know better now than to read the synopsis of the movie and go, oh, this sounds great. Right, Hammer are back on track. And then I go, oh, okay. Oh, great, we've got another Wings of Danger. I don't want to do that.
Wigs of Danger.
Wigs of Danger. # Wigs of Danger. But no, this one was wonderful. I thoroughly enjoyed this. This is a great romance thriller with a wonderful twist ending. Some excellent performances. In fact, there's not a duff performance in this film. Everyone in it is excellent. And I thoroughly enjoyed this. I was edging between an 8 and a 9 because I think this is really up there. At the moment, I'm going to give it an 8. But I think on another viewing, I think it may go up to a 9. But I think this is an excellent entry into the Hammer canon. If that doesn't sound too wrong, but you know what I mean.
It's because it's got a jazz club in it, isn't it?
No, that nearly knocked it down to a 4, but never mind. Luckily, I have a mute button, and it comes in very handy, so there we go. Mr. Taylorson, what is your final thoughts and rating for Stolen Face?
Yeah, I concur with everything you've both said. It's a really enjoyable film, really good watch. Yeah, I think I've said as much as I can, sort of probably say in terms of my thoughts. So I'd probably give it an 8 as well. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think my final thoughts will be that how good it must have been to be a doctor in the 1950s, where you can just turn up at a beautiful woman's door and say, "Oh, I'm a doctor, don't you know?" And before you know it, you've got your head nuzzled in the chest of Elizabeth Scott to check to see if she's got a head cold or not. And even though
he really enjoyed that,
he doesn't have to flash a laminated card or a badge or anything. He's just, "I'm a doctor." "Oh, okay, doctor, please help yourself." And it's just, you think, "Oh, well, yeah, okay." Again, morally dubious, but even so, the man's living the dream.
Makes me want to be an actor.
Not a doctor.
And there you go. The collective superbrain talking about a super pub. This is the quality content you've come to expect. I'm currently getting my research together now about all the whiskies beginning with J, and why the letter J at all. But in the meantime, something that we did touch upon earlier was Ben mentioning Mary Mackenzie's marvellous makeup. This was supplied by Phil Leakey. We've already seen a large body of his work without even realising it. He joined Hammer after finishing his training at Shepperton Studios, and his first job was 1949's The Adventures of PC-49. They obviously liked having him around because he's worked on virtually every film we've covered up until now. But Stolen Face was the first film to make his talents really noticeable. He would then quietly get on with a further 17 films in his office in the toilets until the Quatermass experiment in 1955 that gave him his first major horror success by making some highly convincing victim makeups and an arm that looked like a cactus. This made him the go-to guy when it came to Hammer's defining hit, 1957's The Curse of Frankenstein. He was tasked with creating a creature that not only looked frightening, but didn't look anything like Jack Pierce's iconic squarehead from the 30s. After loads of experimentation, he came up with a scarred and waterlogged look, befitting a man who looks like he'd been in a holding tank for several weeks. The idea evolved by sticking lumps of flesh on a skeleton or skull and stitching it all up. What he ended up with looks like a convincing road accident made from cotton wool, crepe hair, putty, undertaker's wax, and basically anything else he could find that might work. His place in history was completely secured a year later when he would team up with the special effects team and Christopher Lee to create the first Dracula to be seen in full, glorious and bloody colour. Due to cost-cutting, Leakey finally left Hammer in late 1958 when his retainer was finally revoked. Ironically, by this time, he'd already become disillusioned with the studio's continued emphasis on horror subjects, although he would continue to work on some of the finest films Britain produced until his retirement in 1975. When you next see a 50s Hammer film, keep your eye on the credits. There's a strong chance that Phil will be there, and for that, his portrait will hang in these halls along with the rest of the Hammer heroes. All that's left to say today is, if you like what you're listening to, let your friends know. Or even better, visit our online store, grab a t-shirt, wear it out loud and proud, and be surprised by how many interesting conversations this t-shirt will start. The link is in the show notes. If you don't, how have you made it this far? Is there somebody looking after you? There's also all that like and subscribe nonsense I have to bore you with, but it's surprisingly important. You can always hit us up on the socials as well, at HouseHammerPod, or email us at scream@houseofhammerpodcast.com. And next up, we're joined by the Joker and Miss Moneypenny. I kid you not. Until then...
From me, Ben Tillison.
From me, Smokey.
And me, Kev Moore. Stay slinky.